Story 6 of Dastardly Criminals in Space. Ed Reed Short Sci-Fi, Volume 4. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Barbarians by Tom Godwin. Tal Karanth, Supreme Executive of Tharnar, signed the paper and dropped it into the outgoing slot of the message dispatch tube. It was an act that would terminate 180 days of studying the tapes and records on the Terran ship, and would set the final hearing of the Terran man and woman for that day. And, since the Terrans were guilty, their execution would take place before the sun rose again on Tharnar. He went to the wide windows which had automatically opened with the coming of the day's warmth, and looked out across the city. The city had a name, to be found in the books and tapes of history, but for 50,000 years it had been known as the city. It was the city of all cities, the center and soul of Tharnarian civilization. It was a city of architectural beauty, of flowered gardens and landscaped parks, a city of 500 centuries of learning, a city of eternal peace. The gentle summer breeze brought the sweet scent of the flowering lana trees through the window, and the familiar sound of the city as it went about its day's routine. A sound soft and unhurried, like a slow whisper. Peace for 50,000 years. Peace and the unhurried quiet. It would always be so for the city. The supreme executives of the past had been chosen for their ability to ensure the safety of the city, and so had he. He turned away from the window and back to his desk to brush his hand across the gleaming metal top of it. No faintest scratch marred the eternalized surface, although the desk had been there for more than 30,000 years. It was permanent and never-changing, like the robot-operated fleet that guarded Tharnar, like the white and massive executive building, like the way of life on Tharnar. The Terrans would have to die, lest the peace and the way of life on Tharnar be destroyed. They were of a young race, a race so young that his desk had already been in place for 15,000 years when they began emerging from their caves. They were a dangerously immature race. It had been only 300 years since their last war with themselves. 300 years, 3 normal Tharnarian lifetimes, and the Tharnarians had not known war for 600 lifetimes. A race so young could not possess a civilized culture. The Terrans were, he searched for a suitable description, barbarians in spaceships. They lacked the refinement and wisdom of the Tharnarians. They were a dangerous and unpredictable race. It could be seen in their history, could be seen in the way the 2 Terrans had reacted to their capture. He pressed one of the many buttons along the edge of his desk, and a 3-dimensional projection appeared. The scene that had taken place 180 days before, when the Terrans were brought to Tharnar. The ship of the Terrans stood bright silver in the sunlight, slim and graceful against the bulk of the executive building behind it. The Terrans descended the boarding ramp, the left wrist of the man chained to the right wrist of the girl. 2 armed robots walked behind them, their faces metallically impassive, and 4 armed Tharnarian guards waited at the bottom of the ramp to help take the Terrans to their place of imprisonment. The Terrans approached the guards with a watchfulness that reminded him of the old films of the coast wolves that had once lived on Vendel. They did not walk with the studied, practiced leisure of the Tharnarians, but as though they held some unknown vitality barely in check. The face of the man was lean and hard, the black eyes inscrutable as flint. The girl looked at the guards with a bold nonchalance, as though they were really not formidable at all. Somehow, by contrast with the Terrans, the guards appeared to be not grimly vigilant, but only colorless. There seemed to be a menace in the way the man watched the guards. There was the impression that he would overpower them and seize their weapons if given a shadow of a chance. And the girl, what would she do then? Would she flash in beside him to help him, as the female coast wolves always helped their mates? He switched off the projection, feeling a little repugnance at the thought of executing the Terrans. They were living, sentient beings, and intelligent, for all their lack of civilization. It would have been better if they had been of some repulsive and alien physical form, such as bloated, many-legged giant insects. But they were not at all repulsive. They were exactly like the Thanarians. He shook his head. Not exactly. The similarity was only to the eye, and not even to the eye when one looked closely, as he had looked at the images. There was a potential violence about them, lurking close beneath their deceptively Thanarian physical appearance. The Terrans were not like the Thanarians. There was a difference of 50,000 years between them, the difference between savage barbarianism and a great and peaceful civilization. He looked again across the city, listening to its softly murmuring voice. In hundreds of centuries the city had known no strife or violence. But what if the barbarians should come? Not 2 of them, but thousands. What would they do? He was sure he knew what they would do to the gentle, peaceful city, and the faint twinge of remorse at the thought of executing the Terran man and girl paled into insignificance. Under no circumstance could they be permitted to live and tell the others of Tharnar in the city. Bob Randall shifted his position a little in the wide seat, and the chain that linked his wrist with Virginia's rattled metallically, sounding unduly loud in the quiet of the room. Virginia's black hair brushed his cheek as she turned her face up to him to ask in a whisper so low it could not be heard by the 4 guards who stood beside and behind them. "It's almost over, isn't it?" He nodded, as she turned her attention back to the 5 judges, seated at the row of 5 desks before them. The grey-haired one at the center desk, Bob knew, was the one in charge of the proceedings, and his name was Vortigall. He had gained the knowledge by watching and listening, and it was the only information he had acquired. He did not know the names of the other 4 judges, not even for sure that they were judges, and that it was a trial. There had been no introductions by the Thanarians, no volunteering of information. Vortigall spoke to them. "Yes, in fact, the facts are these. You claim that your mission was of a scientific nature, that the 2 of you were sent from Earth to try to reach the center of the galaxy, where you hoped to find data concerning the creation of the galaxy. Your ship carried only the 2 of you, and is one of several such ships sent out on such missions. Since the voyages of these small exploration ships were expected to require an indefinite number of years, and since the occupants would have to endure each other's company for those years, your government thought it more feasible to let the crew of each ship consist of a man and a woman, rather than 2 men. He saw Virginia's cheek quiver at the words, but she managed to restrain the smile. "Our system was reached in your journey," Vortigall continued, "and you swung inside to investigate our sister planet, Vendal. You were met by a guard ship before reaching Vendal, and it fired upon you. Instead of turning back, you destroyed it with a tight beam adaptation of your meteor disintegrator." Vortigall waited questioningly, and Bob said, "Our instruments showed us that the guard ship was robot-operated. They could discern nothing organic in the ship, nothing alive. The same instruments showed us that this planet, Vandal, possessed operating mines and factories, and no organic life other than small animals. We know that machines neither voluntarily build factories nor reproduce other machines, yet the mines and factories were operating. We thought it might be a world where the inhabitants had all died for some reason, and the robots were still following the production orders given them when the race lived." "And so you willfully destroyed the guard ship that would have turned you back?" "We did. It was a machine operated by machines, and so far as we knew, it was protecting a race that had died 1,000 years before. It was all a mystery, and we wanted to find the answer to it." Vortigall and the others accepted the explanation without change of expression. Vortigall resumed. 3 more guard ships appeared when you were near Vendal. In the battle that followed, you severely damaged one of them. and when your ship was finally caught in a guard cruiser's tractor beams, you resisted the robots. When they boarded your ship, you destroyed several of them, and were subdued only when the compartments of your ship were flooded with a disabling gas." "That's true," Bob said. "In summary, you deliberately invaded Thanarian territory, deliberately damaged and destroyed Thanarian ships, and would have landed on Vendal had the guard ships not prevented it. Your guilt is both evident and admitted. Are there any extenuating circumstances that have not been presented at this hearing?" "No," Bob said.